63 applicants stood in the glass lobby of the Nexara building as though they had been arranged there by a careful hand. The floor beneath them gleamed like still water. Blue morning light came through the tall windows and caught on polished shoes, watch faces, belt buckles, and the hard expressions of men who had spent long years learning how to look dangerous before they ever needed to become it. Most of them wore black jackets, black shirts, black ties. The atmosphere carried the scent of expensive cologne, fresh coffee, and ambition pressed into human shape. They stood in 2 rows that curved slightly around the registration desk, each man holding some version of the same quiet belief. That he had already been measured, already been found superior, and had only come today to collect what should naturally be his. Some had military posture, some carried the thickened necks and flattened ears of former fighters, some had the polished calm of retired law enforcement men who had spent half their adult lives speaking with authority and being obeyed. They had all come to compete for one position, a private security role inside one of the most quietly influential security technology firms on the eastern seaboard. Nexara was not the kind of company that needed to raise its voice. Its power lived in contracts, in systems, in infrastructure threaded invisibly through airports, ports, data vaults, and government facilities up and down the coast. The building itself reflected that philosophy. 42 floors of blue glass rising above the east side of the city, elegant without warmth, expensive without decoration, and made to communicate one message before anyone inside ever spoke. Serious people did serious things here. That Monday morning, however, the first floor had been transformed into something more primal. The lobby was no longer simply an entry point. It was an arena in disguise. Then the revolving door turned. The sound was small, almost nothing. But it changed the room. Dominic Shaw stepped inside, wearing a wrinkled grey shirt beneath a dark jacket that had seen better years. He did not look poor. He did not look careless. He looked like a man who had dressed in the dark while attending to more important things. Behind him came a little girl of 6, her dark hair tied back, a white stuffed rabbit tucked beneath one arm. She wore a yellow cardigan and held herself with the solemn steadiness children sometimes possess when the adult beside them has taught them early that the world must be taken seriously. The laughter arrived before the door had fully turned shut. It came in little bursts from different corners of the lobby, too casual to be called cruel by the men producing it, though cruelty was precisely what it was. Someone near the left row murmured that it looked like a preschool drop-off. Another asked whether the candidate had gotten lost on his way to family court. A few men grinned openly. Several did not bother lowering their voices at all. Dominic did not turn toward any of them. He bent slightly, set the girl down beside a chair near the reception area, and smoothed her hair once with a hand, so careful it seemed to belong to a different man than the one who had just walked into a room full of predators. The child looked up at him with complete calm. There was no clinginess in her, no uncertainty, only trust. Then Dominic straightened and walked forward. Hunter Voss crossed the lobby before the registration clerk could greet him. He moved with the thick confidence of a man who had worn authority for long enough that it had begun to replace some of his personality. 38 years old, broad across the chest, expensively groomed, and currently serving as acting head of security for Nexara Group, Hunter had spent the entire morning presenting himself as the adult already in charge of the room. He did not enjoy surprises, and Dominic Shaw, appearing without pedigree, escort, or visible concern for appearances, had the look of a surprise he had not authorized. Hunter stopped directly in front of him. "This isn't a daycare, friend," he said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "The preschool entrance is in the basement." The laughter came again, stronger now, because mockery always grows bolder when someone in power begins it first. Dominic looked at Hunter directly. There was no irritation in his face, no forced patience, no attempt to charm or diffuse the moment. "I have an appointment at 9, he said. "My name is on your list." His voice did not rise. It did not harden. Yet something about the way he said it forced Hunter to glance down at the tablet in the clerk's hands. The clerk, suddenly careful, turned the screen toward him. Something tightened briefly across Hunter's face. Dominic Shaw's name sat at the top of the late-added roster, inserted personally the previous afternoon. No ordinary note had accompanied it. No explanation had been offered. Only a direct flag from the office of the CEO herself. Hunter's expression smoothed almost immediately, but not before Dominic saw the flicker. Of course he saw it. Hunter handed the tablet back with a short, dismissive movement. "Fine," he said. "You're on the list." He turned his gaze toward the child, as though only then noticing the inconvenience of her continued existence. A junior receptionist had already been summoned to prepare a small waiting area with coloring books and juice boxes, an arrangement made on direct instruction from upstairs. Luna, as the girl was called, was escorted to a low table near reception. She sat without complaint, placed her white stuffed rabbit beside her, opened a coloring book to a blank page, and began to draw with the focused gravity of someone beginning important work. Dominic walked into the main assessment hall without looking back. From the front row, Logan Cross watched him with an expression somewhere between amusement and pity. Logan weighed 253 pounds, though he wore that weight with the ease of an athlete still dangerous inside it. He had won 3 regional MMA championships in the last 4 years, and had already become the unspoken favorite among the candidates before the morning briefing had even ended. He had the kind of body that made people rearrange themselves around him, and the kind of self-assurance that comes from being very rarely contradicted by reality. He sat with one arm stretched across the back of his chair, and one leg extended, completely at ease inside the assumption that this entire day was moving toward him. "Bold move," he murmured to no one in particular as Dominic passed. A few men nearby smirked. The first round began not on the mat, but at the standing desks arranged along the far side of the hall. Each candidate was given 3 minutes, 1 interviewer, and a set of situational questions designed to test judgment under pressure rather than raw intimidation. It was, in theory, the part of the process where polished resumes and disciplined thinking would matter most. The men ahead of Dominic approached with folders, certificates, tactical portfolios, and prepared narratives. One former police captain handed over 12 neatly stapled pages and began his introduction with, "I've been doing this for 15 years. A former contractor laid down glossy photographs of himself with celebrity clients. Another candidate wore his service record almost like perfume, releasing it into every answer. Dominic came to the desk with nothing in his hands. The interviewer, a neat woman in a navy suit, glanced up and waited. "Your CV?" she asked. Dominic placed a single white sheet on the desk. The interviewer looked down. On the page was a phone number and one typed line. "Call this number if you need verification." She blinked, uncertain whether she was looking at arrogance or absurdity. Hunter, standing nearby with folded arms, gave a short breath through his nose, the kind people use when they have decided to be patient for an audience. "You're serious?" he asked. "Very," Dominic said. No smile, no challenge, just the word. The interviewer moved to the scenario questions. A principal exits a hotel under partial media exposure. 2 unidentified vehicles are parked across the avenue. 1 route is faster. 1 is more secure. What do you choose? Dominic answered immediately, not with jargon, but with decisions. Not the textbook answer, not the flashy one, the right one. Then another, then another. Every answer carried the same quiet quality. He was not trying to sound experienced, he was solving the problem. Several of the interviewers began writing faster. The second part of the first round was a response assessment. The candidates were shown a 90-second simulation of a threat environment, a formal event space, multiple moving actors, a protected principal in the foreground, shifting camera angles, and layered distractions meant to pull attention toward the obvious while hiding what mattered. Each man had 30 seconds after viewing to identify danger points and propose a response protocol. Logan Cross watched the video with the pleasant concentration of a man doing a thing he had done well before. When his turn came, he named 4 of the 6 marked threats, laid out a solid but conventional extraction path, and did it all with crisp authority. Several observers nodded. It was the kind of answer expected from a frontrunner. Then Dominic stepped forward. He watched the screen once, that was all. He stood with his arms relaxed at his sides and said, 6 marked positions, 2 unmarked. The camera did so behind column 3 on the left, gives an approach angle of approximately 4 feet without clean visibility. The man in the green jacket has shifted his right-hand position 3 times since the video began. He's carrying something he hasn't decided to use yet. The principal's handler is standing too close to the right shoulder and would obstruct the first defensive turn. Silence met the end of his answer. Not long silence, only 2 seconds perhaps, but long enough for the room to feel it. Hunter said, "Lucky guess." Dominic said nothing. He returned to his seat as though this outcome had not surprised him, and therefore did not deserve celebration. High above the hall, on the 38th floor, Giselle Park sat in her office watching the assessment feed on a monitor mounted above a perfectly ordered desk. She had been CEO of Nexara long enough to learn that most men in competitive rooms eventually revealed themselves, usually by overreaching, sometimes by talking too much, often by trying too hard to let her know they belonged in her orbit. Dominic Shaw had not once looked as though he wanted anything from her at all. Her assistant, Madison Cole, stood near the office door with a tablet in one hand. "He doesn't look like the usual type," Madison said carefully. "No," Giselle replied. "He doesn't." 3 weeks earlier, an unmarked envelope had appeared on her desk without sender identification. Inside had been 12 pages, a service record, a behavioral summary, performance analysis, fragments of personal history, skill evaluations that read less like praise than warning. On the last page, beneath the final paragraph, 1 sentence had been typed with old-fashioned precision. "She will need him." Giselle had traced the number attached to the file and gotten nothing useful in return. No name, no direct source, just resistance, as though someone had closed a door without making a sound. Now she watched Dominic on the monitor, seated with the same expression he had worn since entering the building. Not bored, not tense, not humble in the performative way some men became when standing near power. Simply present. It unsettled her more than she wished to admit. When the bracket for the physical round was posted to the board in the main hall, the candidates drifted toward it with the sharpened focus of men who understood that the day had now reached the part most of them trusted most. They scanned the names, compared size, calculated odds. Most of the pairings looked balanced enough to preserve fairness. One did not. Hunter Voss had placed Dominic Shaw against Logan Cross. It was not an administrative accident. It was the move of a man who believed he could restore order through humiliation. If the strange late entry candidate could be erased quickly and publicly, then the room would make sense again. Hunter would not have to explain why the CEO had inserted a name no one recognized. Logan would destroy him. The building would return to its preferred narrative. Logan read the bracket and smiled, not cruelly. That was the curious thing. Logan was not especially malicious. He simply could not imagine losing to what he saw before him. Dominic did not look like danger to him. He looked like an interruption. Around the mat area, men gathered in loose arcs. Some leaned against pillars. A few took out their phones, already preparing to record what they assumed would be a brief lesson in hierarchy. The mood in the room shifted from competition to anticipation. Not because they expected a fight, but because they expected a correction. Upstairs, Madison leaned toward Giselle's monitor. They put him against Cross. Giselle was already rising from her chair. "You're going down?" "The screen is too small," Giselle said. She stepped into the corridor with the clipped, silent speed of a woman who did not waste motion. By the time she reached the training floor entrance, the room below had arranged itself around the mat in widening circles of attention. Her appearance in the doorway changed the atmosphere immediately. Men straightened. Side conversations died mid-sentence. Hunter moved toward her with practiced readiness. "Ms. Park, there's no need to—" "Continue," she said, eyes already on the mat. She did not look at Logan for more than a second. Logan was legible, large, trained, confident, very likely to dominate anyone who met him directly on terms he understood. Dominic was crouched near the edge of the mat, retying the lace on his left shoe. He was not glancing at the crowd, not scanning the room for approval, not checking whether the CEO had arrived to witness what happened next. He seemed entirely uninterested in whether anyone important was watching. In 12 years of corporate leadership, Giselle Park had become intimately familiar with performance. Men performed strength for her. Competence, loyalty, calm, intelligence, charm, urgency. Deference disguised as confidence, confidence disguised as indifference. Dominic Shaw was the first man in recent memory who appeared to have no interest in leaving an impression on her at all. That fact, more than anything else, held her attention. Logan rolled his neck and stepped onto the mat. "You sure you don't want to give your spot to the next guy?" he asked. Laughter moved around the room again, softer now, more expectant than mocking. Dominic finished tying his lace. He stood. He did not answer Logan. He stepped onto the mat and turned toward center with the composure of a man who had already decided what was about to happen and saw no reason to dramatize it. Down the hall, in the reception area, Luna had stopped coloring. Through the narrow window beside the corridor door, she could see part of the training floor. The young staff member beside her smiled gently and asked, "Is your dad strong?" Luna held the white rabbit a little tighter. "He doesn't lose," she said. Then, after a beat, with the simple honesty of a child who knows the difference between truth and bragging, she added, "But he never says that himself." Back on the mat, the referee raised his hand. The room settled into breathless stillness. A timer beeped. Logan came forward at once. He did not circle. He did not test range. He had finished 4 matches already that morning, all in under 40 seconds, and all using variations of the same trusted sequence. Close distance, establish grip, shift weight, impose mass, end resistance. He applied that equation now with the relaxed confidence of a man repeating something proven. Dominic moved backward, not scrambling, not retreating. One precise step. The adjustment was almost invisible. A small shift of weight onto the outside edge of his left foot that altered Logan's entry line by just enough to matter. Logan's hand closed on empty space. A murmur ran through the room. Logan reset and came again, faster this time. Dominic gave ground again, but not fully. It was as if he allowed just enough apparent vulnerability to invite commitment. Logan took the invitation. Once more, the grip found nothing stable to take. By the 9th second, Giselle had unconsciously tightened her hand against the doorframe. She was no longer watching Logan. She was watching Dominic's eyes. They were unnervingly still. Most fighters tracked motion. Hands, hips, shoulders, feet. Their focus moved with the threat. Dominic's did not. He seemed to be reading some deeper pattern beneath the obvious one, some current below individual motion. He was not reacting late or barely escaping. He was gathering information. Logan attacked a third time. Dominic yielded a half opening, then removed it. A fourth attempt. Again, an opening appeared and vanished. The crowd's energy began to change. The laughter had died. Phones remained raised, but the men holding them were no longer recording for entertainment. They were recording because they did not understand what they were seeing and did not trust themselves to remember it correctly afterward. At the 17th second, something in Dominic's face altered, not dramatically. A small narrowing around the eyes, a private conclusion reached. He had seen enough. For 16 seconds, he had not been fighting Logan Cross. He had been learning him. At the 18th second, Dominic stepped forward instead of back. What happened next unfolded too quickly for most of the room to track in sequence. One of his arms intercepted Logan's elbow at exactly the wrong angle for Logan to preserve balance. The other made a short, economical adjustment at the center line. It was not a conventional throw, not a strike combination, not anything the room could comfortably classify. It was closer to subtraction than violence, a precise removal of structure. Logan's own momentum completed the rest. The giant man left his feet, lost his axis, and hit the mat face down with a sound so final that the room seemed to empty of air. 27 seconds. That was all. No one spoke. Dominic released the hold immediately and stepped back. His breathing had not changed. He turned his hands once, as if checking simple mechanics, then lowered them. Logan did not move for a moment. When he finally did, it was with the stunned incomprehension of a man who had not merely lost, but been introduced to a category of skill he had not known existed. Near the edge of the crowd, Hunter Voss was still holding a sheet of paper. It slipped from his fingers and touched the floor, with a small sound that seemed absurdly loud in the silence. The phones remained pointed at the mat. None of their owners had yet remembered to lower them. Then Luna appeared in the doorway. She had left her chair the moment the room became silent instead of noisy. She crossed the floor with the focused urgency only children possess. White rabbit tucked beneath one arm, shoes tapping softly over polished surface. She went straight to Dominic. "Dad," she said, looking up at him. "Are you done?" Dominic crouched to her level. He looked at her face with the same careful attention he had given the room. Logan, and every other moving part around him all morning. Only now there was warmth in it. "All done," he said. She nodded once, accepting the answer as sufficient. "Should we get orange juice?" A tiny pause. "With ice?" she asked. "With ice." He stood, took her hand, and turned toward the exit. Behind him, 2 other candidates were helping Logan to his feet, each wearing the strained expression of men trying to behave as though nothing irreversible had just happened to their understanding of the day. Around them, the room was still recovering its language. At the doorway, Giselle Park stood without moving. Her hand dropped from the frame. She watched Dominic and Luna walk toward the hall, as though they had merely completed an ordinary appointment. No triumph in him, no glance back toward Maddox, no search for direction. He had entered a room determined to dismiss him, dismantled its favorite champion in less than half a minute, and departed with the practical calm of a father, already thinking about juice, as he turned and walked back toward the elevator. Madison fell into step beside him, saying nothing at first. The corridor stretched ahead in clean corporate lines, but something fundamental in the day had shifted. At last, Madison said quietly. His breathing didn't change. "I know," Giselle replied. The elevator doors opened. She stepped inside. The mirrored walls caught her reflection from 3 angles, all equally controlled, all equally unreadable. But somewhere between the ground floor and the 38th, she allowed herself one private, unguarded conclusion. She had not watched a single other person in that room for the last 7 minutes. And before the bracket was even fully concluded, before the rest of the candidates had finished rearranging themselves around their disbelief, Giselle Park made her decision. Dominic Shaw would be coming upstairs. The other 62 candidates were still standing in the main hall when Madison Cole appeared at the doorway and spoke Dominic Shaw's name. It was not shouted. It did not need to be. The room had not yet recovered from what it had just witnessed, and so every movement, every word, carried more weight than usual. Conversations that had only just begun again after the match paused once more. Several heads turned in unison. Dominic did not hesitate. He was already walking toward the door before the last syllable of his name had fully settled in the air. Luna moved with him, her hand slipping naturally into his, as though this had always been the next step in the morning. The white rabbit, Pepper, was tucked under her arm again, its soft shape a quiet contrast to the sharp, unsettled energy left behind on the training floor. Hunter Voss stepped forward, adjusting his jacket with deliberate calm. "Ms. Park hasn't concluded the selection process," he began, his tone measured, controlled, the tone of a man attempting to restore order after losing it. Madison did not stop walking. "Ms. Park has already made her decision," she said, without turning. There was no hostility in her voice, which made it worse. Dominic passed Hunter without looking at him. Luna did the same, though she glanced up briefly with the curious neutrality of a child observing something she did not yet understand, but had already decided was unimportant. The elevator doors closed on them before anyone in the room could form a response that mattered. The 38th floor was quiet in a way that felt intentional, not empty, not silent, but arranged, the kind of quiet that came from design rather than absence. The carpet softened footsteps. The walls held sound instead of reflecting it. The air carried the faint scent of something clean and expensive that had no identifiable source. For Luna, it was a different world entirely. She stepped off the elevator and looked around with serious concentration, as though evaluating whether this place met certain internal standards she had not yet explained to anyone. Dominic did not interrupt her. He allowed her to observe. He always did. Madison led them down a corridor lined with glass-walled offices and controlled light. "This way," she said. At the end of the hall, double doors opened into Giselle Park's office. The space was large but not indulgent. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city in clean geometric sections. The desk was positioned with exact intention, neither dominating the room nor retreating from it. 3 items rested on its surface: a monitor, a notepad, and a glass of water. Nothing else. No photographs, No personal artifacts. No evidence that the person who worked here had a life beyond the decisions made inside these walls. Luna stepped in first. She stopped 2 paces inside the room and looked around with the same quiet evaluation she had shown in the hallway. "It's nice in here," she said. A small pause. "But there aren't any plants." Giselle, standing behind her desk, looked at the girl. For a moment the room held something unexpected. "I know," she said. Then her attention returned to Dominic. The conversation about plants ended, but not entirely. Something about it lingered. "Sit down," Giselle said. She slid a folder across the desk. Dominic sat without hesitation. Luna climbed into the chair beside him, opened a small notebook from her coat pocket, and began drawing again as though she had been waiting for this exact moment to continue. Giselle watched Dominic closely. Up close, he was even more difficult to categorize. There was nothing outwardly remarkable about him in the conventional sense. No visible scars designed to impress. No posture that demanded attention. No attempt to project authority. And yet, the absence of those things created its own kind of gravity. "You've had specialized training," she said. "Yes. In what environments?" "Specific ones." It was not evasive. It was simply incomplete. Giselle studied him for a second longer, then shifted. "Your service record. It's in the file you reviewed. You don't elaborate much." "There's no need to." Madison, standing near the door, allowed herself a brief glance toward Giselle. Most candidates filled silence with explanation. Dominic seemed comfortable letting silence exist exactly as it was. Giselle tapped the folder once with her finger. "The document I received," she said. 12 pages. No sender. No return address. Who sent it? Dominic's eyes moved to the folder. For 2 seconds, something changed. Not visibly enough for most people to notice, but Giselle noticed. Recognition, calculation, then stillness again. "I don't know," he said. She held his gaze. He was telling the truth. That was what unsettled her most. "What salary are you asking?" she said. Dominic gave her a number. It was precise. Not low enough to signal desperation, not high enough to suggest opportunism. It was the number of someone who had measured the work itself, not the market around it. Giselle picked up her pen. She signed the contract without negotiation. Madison did not move, but her stillness sharpened slightly. It was not unusual for Giselle to make fast decisions. It was unusual for her to make them without pressure, without leverage, without extracting some additional concession. Dominic signed where indicated. The sound of pen on paper was the only thing in the room for a moment. Luna, without looking up, said, "Do we stay now?" Dominic glanced at her. "Yes." She nodded once and continued drawing. Downstairs, Hunter Voss stood alone in the corridor outside the main door. His phone was in his hand. The message had arrived less than 10 seconds. Decision confirmed. Dominic Shaw, position filled. Hunter stared at the screen for a long moment. Then he selected a number. It did not appear in Nexara's directory. The call connected quickly. "Yeah," Hunter said, his voice low. "It's him." A pause. "No," he added. "Not what we expected." Another pause. His jaw tightened slightly. "I'll handle it." The call ended after 40 seconds. Hunter slipped the phone back into his pocket, smoothed the front of his jacket, and returned to the main hall with the practiced composure of a man who had just adjusted a plan rather than lost control of one. Dominic's first week at Nexara passed without announcement. He did not introduce himself to the staff beyond what was necessary. He did not attempt to establish presence. He did not correct anyone who underestimated him. He simply worked, and in doing so, he began to change the building. He stayed 1 step behind Giselle, not 2, not beside. 1, the distance was exact, consistent, intentional. By the second day, Giselle noticed. By the third, she understood. It was the correct position, the one that allowed immediate response without intrusion. Protection without interference. No one had ever done it correctly for more than a few hours before drifting too close or too far. Dominic never drifted. He read rooms before she entered them. A half-second pause at the threshold, eyes moving once across the space. He noted exits, sightlines, posture shifts, tone changes, the small, almost invisible signals that preceded conflict or discomfort. He did not announce these observations. He adjusted to them, quietly, efficiently, completely. By the end of the week, Giselle realized something she had not experienced in 7 years of leadership. She had stopped thinking about her security, not because she forgot it existed, but because it functioned exactly as it should. She also noticed something else. Dominic did not look at her the way people usually did. There was no performance in his attention, no subtle shift in posture when she entered a room, no unconscious lean toward power. He was not positioned toward her because she was important. He was positioned toward her because she was his responsibility. It was a distinction so unfamiliar that it took her 3 days to fully recognize it. And once she did, she could not unsee it. On the 5th day, the daycare called at noon. Luna's usual afternoon sitter had an emergency. Dominic stood at the office door and spoke quietly with Madison. He did not enter. He did not interrupt Giselle directly. Madison stepped inside. "There's a scheduling issue," she said. "He'll need to leave early." Giselle did not look up from her screen. "Bring her here." Madison paused. Giselle continued working. The conversation was over. Luna arrived 45 minutes later with her backpack and coloring kit. She walked into the waiting area as though she had been there before, though she had not. Pepper was placed carefully on the couch. Her supplies were arranged in a small, precise order. She said hello to Giselle. Then she worked. For hours, without interruption, without noise. At 4:30, she stood, walked to Giselle's open office door, and held out a folded piece of paper. Giselle took it, unfolded it, looked. It was a drawing in crayon. 3 figures stood in front of a house, one tall in dark lines, one with long hair and a grey dress, one small, holding something white and round. A tree stood beside the house, green leaves drawn in uneven circles. The sky above was yellow. Giselle looked at the drawing longer than she intended to. Then she folded it carefully, opened the top left drawer of her desk, placed it inside, not in the recycling bin beneath, in the drawer. Luna nodded once, satisfied, and returned to her seat. That evening an email arrived. No sender, no signature. 9 words. "You're being sold and you don't know it yet." Attached was a screenshot. A contract clause. Section 9. Giselle read it once, then again. Her legal team did not answer immediately. When they did, the explanation came too quickly. Too structured. Too rehearsed. She ended the call, sat at her desk, looked at nothing. Dominic stood near the window. He had been there since the call ended. She did not turn toward him immediately. "Do you know anything about this?" she asked. "Not enough yet," he said, "but I'm looking." His voice did not carry urgency, which meant the situation did. Outside, the city moved in its usual patterns. Inside, something had already begun to shift. And for the first time since Dominic Shaw had walked into the building, the threat he represented was no longer directed at the men who had laughed at him. It was directed at something much larger, something already inside the walls. The dinner with Isaac Crane was arranged for Thursday evening, not quickly, not urgently, but with the deliberate ease of something that had already been decided long before anyone acknowledged it out loud. The Meridian Hotel rose above the city like a statement written in glass and light. Its 40th floor restaurant was designed with precision, low lighting that softened edges, wide windows that framed the skyline, as if it belonged to the people seated inside, and a silence carefully maintained by staff who understood that the most powerful conversations were rarely loud. Isaac Crane stood when Giselle entered. He was 62, though he carried his age with the polished control of a man who had spent decades refining not only his appearance, but the way others perceived it. His suit was perfectly cut, his expression warm without being familiar, his smile calibrated. "Giselle," he said, as though greeting a respected colleague rather than a future acquisition. "You look well." "Isaac," she replied. Dominic stepped in behind her, one pace back, exactly where he belonged. Crane's eyes flicked toward him for half a second. That was all, but it was enough. It was the look of a man who had just completed an assessment and filed it away for later use. They sat. Wine was ordered without discussion. The bottle selected cost more than most people's monthly rent, though no one at the table acknowledged that fact. It was simply part of the environment. Like the lighting, like the view, the early conversation moved with practiced ease. Crane spoke about the future, about alignment, about shared vision. He used words like synergy, continuity, partnership, the language of corporate diplomacy that turned acquisition into collaboration and control into inevitability. He referenced Nexara's recent initiatives with impressive accuracy, 3 of Giselle's projects by name, specific details that suggested not just research, but careful study. It was not flattery. It was positioning. Dominic listened without appearing to. His gaze moved occasionally, not toward Crane, but toward reflections in the glass, toward subtle shifts in the room, toward the patterns beneath the conversation, rather than the words themselves. Giselle responded in kind. Measured, controlled, engaged. 2 skilled negotiators performing competence for each other, while each calculated the other's true position beneath the performance. The appetizers came and went. The main course arrived, and somewhere between the first and second exchange of polite agreement, Crane placed the sentence on the table. "The Q4 benchmarks, of course," he said lightly, "will be the natural moment of alignment, given Section 9. Giselle set her fork down. Carefully, not abruptly, not slowly, just enough to mark the moment, without dramatizing it. Inside something dropped, and did not stop falling. "Of course," she said. Crane smiled. It was not a victory smile, not overtly, but it carried the quiet certainty of a man who believed the outcome had already been secured. "I want to be clear," he continued. "I'm not an adversary." A small pause. "I'm simply pragmatic." Giselle looked at him, and for the first time that evening, there was no performance in her gaze. "I appreciate the clarity," she said. The conversation moved on, but nothing that followed mattered as much as what had already been said. In the car afterward, the city passed in streaks of amber and white light. Dominic drove. Giselle sat in the back, her reflection faint in the glass. For 20 minutes, neither of them spoke. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was processing. Finally, Giselle said, "Did you read the contract before you took this job?" "First morning," Dominic replied. A pause. "Section 9, he added. "Section 14, Appendix C." She leaned forward slightly. "Why would you read my contracts?" "I can't protect you," he said, "if I don't understand the ground you're standing on." There was no emphasis in the sentence, no attempt to impress, just a statement of fact. Giselle watched his reflection in the rearview mirror. He was watching the road, but his jaw carried a line of tension that had not been there earlier, which meant something important. He had been performing calm at dinner, the same way she had, and she had not noticed. That realization stayed with her longer than the conversation itself. 3 nights later, Dominic found the gap. It appeared during a standard review of the Nexara security logs. Nothing dramatic. No alarms. No flagged alerts. Just an absence. 11 minutes of missing footage in the basement parking level. No error code. No system notification. No indication that anything had gone wrong. Which meant something had gone exactly right. Dominic leaned back slightly in his chair. Looked at the timestamp again. Then again. In systems like Nexara's, gaps did not happen. Not accidentally. Not without explanation. They were created. He made a copy of the log, closed the original, and sat in silence for a long moment. He had spent 4 years in a Delta Force unit that specialized in internal compromise detection. Situations where the threat did not come from outside the perimeter, but from within it. From trusted systems, trusted people, trusted structures. He knew what the early architecture of betrayal looked like. He was looking at it now. Hunter Voss had access to the camera system. Hunter Voss had made a call to a number not listed in Nexara's directory. Hunter Voss had been in the building during those 11 minutes. None of these facts proved anything, not yet, but together they formed the beginning of a pattern. Dominic did not report the gap, not immediately. Reporting it would trigger process. Process would alert the wrong people, and right now, he did not yet know who those people were. Instead, he began building something else. A separate record. Quiet, independent, unseen. The next phase of the plan revealed itself slowly. Not through direct action, but through small inconsistencies. 2 service elevators accessed after hours using maintenance badges that had not been officially checked out. 3 external visitors registered under a consulting firm that did not exist in Nexara's vendor database. A 6-second anomaly in the motion sensors on the 38th floor corridor. Just long enough to suggest override, not malfunction. Each detail on its own was minor. Together, they formed direction. Someone was preparing access. Not randomly, not opportunistically. Precisely. Timed. And aligned with something else. Dominic stood near the window in Giselle's office that evening as she reviewed the contract again. Section 9. It was not obvious at first glance. It never was. That was the design. Buried within operational matter. Wrapped in neutral phrasing, it established a conditional alignment trigger. Tied to Q4 performance benchmarks. On paper, it looked like a standard clause. In practice, it allowed control to shift under specific conditions. Conditions that could be influenced. Engineered. Forced. You didn't see it, Dominic said quietly. It was not a question. Giselle did not look up. No, she said. A pause. Not in time. The admission hung in the air, not as weakness, but as fact. The realization came slowly, then all at once. I've been surrounded, she said. Dominic said nothing, because there was nothing to add. She stood, walked to the window. The city stretched out below, unaware. I built this company, she said, and I signed the paper that could take it away. Dominic watched her reflection in the glass. You didn't sign it, he said. You were guided to it. She turned slightly. That's supposed to be better? No, he said. But it means it can be undone. The emergency shareholder session was scheduled for Tuesday. Isaac Crane had called it himself. The language was clean, routine. Q4 evaluation, strategic alignment. Nothing in the notice suggested urgency, which meant everything about it was urgent. Dominic reviewed the logs again. Then again, patterns were no longer forming. They were aligning. The timing of the anomalies, the presence of unregistered personnel, the internal access points. It all converged on one conclusion. The shareholder session was not the objective. It was the distraction. The real target was the Nexara central server. 900 corporate clients, encrypted data, contracts, infrastructure access, everything that gave Nexara its power. If someone gained access during the session, when every decision-maker was in one room, focused in one direction. It would not just weaken the company. It would transfer its value. Instantly, irreversibly. Dominic checked the time. 40 minutes. That was what remained. He closed the laptop, stood, and began to move. Not quickly, not visibly, but with absolute commitment. He cleared the lower floors first, confirmed positions, adjusted coverage, placed Madison at Giselle's side with simple instructions. Then he took the fire stairwell to the 38th floor. No cameras, no noise, no attention. Exactly as intended. They were already there. 4 men, professional, efficient, moving toward the server room with the calm confidence of people who believed the path had been cleared for them. It had been, just not in the way they expected. Dominic stepped into their path, and the final phase began. The first man did not see Dominic until it was too late. He had been focused on the keypad panel beside the server room door, one hand hovering just above the access sequence, the other resting near his jacket where a concealed weapon might have been. His posture was relaxed, not careless, but confident in the assumption that the floor was empty. It wasn't. Dominic closed the distance in 3 silent steps. The movement was not aggressive, not rushed. It carried none of the outward signals that usually preceded violence, which was precisely why it worked. One hand secured the man's wrist before he could react. The other disrupted his balance at the shoulder joint, not with force, but with direction. The man's weight shifted incorrectly. His footing failed him. By the time his body registered what had happened, he was already on the ground, breath knocked out of him, one arm immobilized. No noise, no alarm. The second man turned at the wrong moment. Not too early, not too late, just late enough. Dominic adjusted his angle, intercepted the forward motion, redirected it. A controlled impact against the wall, followed by a precise lock that removed the man's ability to stand without causing structural damage. He collapsed into stillness, conscious, but no longer a factor. The third reacted properly. He moved immediately. Left side approach, fast, direct. Dominic had already accounted for that. From the moment he saw the group's formation, he knew how they would respond under pressure. Teams trained together developed patterns. Predictable ones. The third man's attack met empty space. A half-step shift, a pivot, a controlled break in momentum. He went down harder than the first 2. Still controlled, still contained. The fourth lasted the longest. He was the largest, the most disciplined, the only one who did not rush forward blindly after the initial disruption. He paused, measured, adjusted, which made him more dangerous. For 11 seconds, the corridor held real resistance. Then it ended. Dominic closed inside his reach, removed leverage, and brought him down with a movement too efficient to be called a fight. When the man hit the ground, he stayed there. 4 men. Less than a minute. The corridor returned to silence. Footsteps echoed from the eastern corridor. Not hurried, not uncertain. Hunter Voss stepped into view with a firearm in his hand. His expression was flat, not shocked, not angry, prepared. "I need 15 minutes, he said. "No greeting. No explanation, just the statement. Stand down," he added. "Nobody gets hurt." Dominic looked at him. His left shoulder registered a dull ache from the previous exchange. Not serious, not limiting. Just information. He filed it, moved on. "I don't have 15 minutes, he said. The space between them tightened. Hunter adjusted his grip slightly. "You don't understand what's happening here," Hunter said. "No," Dominic replied. "I do." A pause. "Then—" Hunter moved first. He was skilled. That much was clear immediately. Not a brute, not reckless. He understood distance, timing, pressure, but he was operating from a different premise. He was managing a situation, Dominic was ending one. The difference was decisive. Hunter's first action was controlled, measured, calculated to force compliance without escalation. Dominic's response removed that option entirely. Close distance, neutralize line of fire, break structure. Within seconds, the weapon was no longer a factor. Within seconds more, neither was Hunter. When the sound of boots on the stairwell announced the arrival of the building's internal security team, they found Hunter Voss seated against the wall, hands immobilized, expression steady, but hollow beneath the surface. The kind of expression a man wears when he realizes, too late, that he has placed his bet on the wrong outcome. Downstairs, the boardroom was full. 31 shareholders, one Isaac Crane, and Giselle Park at the head of the table. The room was designed for control. Long table, balanced lighting, every seat placed with intention. Crane stood near the far end, mid-sentence, his voice carrying the calm authority of a man accustomed to being heard and agreed with. And as we move toward alignment, Giselle's earpiece activated. Madison's voice, brief, precise. Handled, internal breach confirmed, Hunter involved. Giselle did not react. Not outwardly. She let Crane finish his sentence. Let the silence settle. Then she spoke. This session will need to be postponed. The room shifted, not loudly, but perceptibly. Crane turned slightly. Is there a concern? He asked. Yes, Giselle said. A pause. The reasons will be explained by law enforcement within the next few minutes. Another pause. Then she looked directly at him, and something changed. The diplomacy was gone. Section 9 will also be contested, she said, under Clause 22B. The words landed clean, precise, which provides for nullification in cases of documented partner fraud. Silence. I have the documentation, she added. Crane did not move, but something in his face tightened. Barely. I've been building the file, she said. 8 days. The room held stillness, not confusion, not yet, but awareness. Crane's smile did not disappear, but it changed. Less certain, less complete. The balance had shifted, and everyone in the room could feel it. The hospital had not been part of Dominic's plan. He declined the first ambulance, the second, the third, until Giselle appeared in the Nexara lobby as law enforcement secured the building perimeter. She looked at his shoulder, at the condition of his shirt, then at him. I'm driving, she said. He started to respond. She held up the keys. The conversation ended. At the emergency intake desk, she gave his name, his insurance, his details, from memory. The nurse looked between them briefly, then said nothing. In the exam room, the overhead lights hummed softly. Dominic sat on the edge of the bed, his posture unchanged despite the injury. Giselle stood at the supply shelf, selected gauze, antiseptic, moved back toward him. You know how to do this? He asked. No, she said, but I learn quickly. She began working on the cut along his forearm, not perfectly, but carefully, deliberately. He watched her for a moment, then said nothing more. Luna arrived 35 minutes later. Madison had gone to get her when the sitter failed to respond. The girl entered the room quickly, Pepper tucked under her arm, her expression focused in a way that children only adopt when something truly matters. She crossed the distance to the bed in seconds, took Dominic's hand, held it, said nothing, which said everything. After a moment, she turned to Giselle. Careful. Evaluating. Is Miss Park the reason Dad got hurt? She asked. Dominic answered first. No. A pause. I got hurt because of what my job needed me to do. Luna considered this, accepted it, then looked back at Giselle. Something in her expression shifted. Satisfied? Can you stay? She asked. I don't want Dad to be alone when he's hurt. Giselle looked at Dominic. He was studying the wall with suspicious concentration. She pulled the chair closer, sat down. Okay, she said. By 11 that night, the corridor had quieted. The hospital moved in low, steady rhythms, distant footsteps, muted voices, machines breathing softly in unseen rooms. Luna slept on the waiting bench, her head resting on Giselle's folded jacket, Pepper tucked beneath her chin. Giselle sat beside her, one hand resting lightly near the girl's shoulder. Still present, Dominic stood in the doorway for a long time, discharged, bandaged, ready to leave, but not moving. He watched them. The girl, the woman, the small, unexpected shape of something forming between them. Giselle looked up. Their eyes met. No words, none needed. After a moment, he walked back in, sat on the other side of Luna, so that the child rested between them, centered, balanced, held. After a while, Giselle spoke quietly. She added something. Dominic waited. "The drawing," she said. "The one she gave me." What did she add? "A tree." A pause. "In front of the house." Dominic said nothing. The corridor light hummed softly above them. Luna breathed in slow, even rhythm. Safe, certain, without condition, and for the first time in a very long time. The corner of Dominic Shaw's mouth moved. Not much, not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough. A beginning. Morning did not arrive all at once. It came slowly, in layers. Soft light through hospital blinds, the distant hum of early traffic, the quiet reshuffling of a building returning to function after a long night of interruption. Dominic was already awake. He had not slept much, not because of the injury, though his shoulder still carried a dull, persistent reminder of the previous day. It was something else, the kind of awareness that did not fully turn off, the kind that remained even in stillness. Across from him, Luna shifted slightly on the bench, her hand still curled loosely around the edge of Giselle's jacket. Giselle had not moved either. She sat upright, her posture unchanged, though the faint tension around her eyes suggested the night had not been restful. For a moment no one spoke. The silence held something different now. Not uncertainty, not distance, something quieter, more settled. By the time they returned to Nexara, the building had already begun its transformation. Law enforcement had cleared most of the visible disruption. The lobby was clean again. The glass reflected the same controlled light as always. Employees moved through the space with careful normalcy, though the undercurrent of awareness remained. Something had happened here, something significant, and not all of it had been explained. Hunter Voss was gone. Officially, he was under investigation. Unofficially, everyone understood what that meant. Giselle walked through the building without slowing. Dominic remained one step behind her. Luna was not with them that morning. She had been dropped at school, her routine preserved with quiet determination, as though maintaining normalcy was itself a form of protection. Inside the boardroom, the shareholders had reconvened. 31 of them again. But the arrangement felt different now, less certain, less controlled. Isaac Crane stood near the far end of the table, his expression composed, though the careful balance he had maintained the previous evening had shifted. Giselle took her seat, placed her hands on the table, looked at him directly. "We'll continue," she said. The presentation did not begin with slides. It began with evidence. Giselle did not raise her voice. She did not dramatize the situation. She simply laid out the sequence, the unauthorized access attempts, the falsified maintenance logs, the breach attempt during the shareholder session, the connection points, the internal involvement, each detail placed with precision, each piece aligned. Dominic stood near the wall, silent, watching the room rather than the table. He observed reactions, not the obvious ones, but the smaller shifts, the ones that revealed who was surprised, who was calculating, who was already adjusting their position. Crane listened, carefully. When she finished, he spoke. "This is serious," he said, "and I'm sure it will be handled appropriately." but I don't see how this relates to our agreement." Giselle did not hesitate. "It relates," she said, "because the individuals involved were operating in coordination with access pathways established under your partnership framework." A pause, which activates Clause 22B. Crane's eyes narrowed slightly. "That's a broad interpretation." "It's a precise one," she replied. Silence settled over the table. One of the shareholders shifted in his seat. Another leaned forward. The balance was moving again, not violently, but definitively. Crane adjusted his stance. "This is unfortunate," he said. "But I think we're all aware that business at this level sometimes attracts complications." He smiled slightly. "As I said before, I'm pragmatic." Giselle held his gaze. "And I'm no longer negotiating," she said. The words landed without force, which made them absolute. The meeting did not end immediately. There were questions, discussions, legal considerations raised and countered. But the outcome had already changed. Crane was no longer in control of the room. He knew it. So did everyone else. When the session finally adjourned, it did so without resolution, but with direction, and for the first time since the merger discussions had begun. That direction no longer belonged to him. Later that afternoon, the building felt different, not visibly, not structurally, but in the way people moved through it. More aware, more aligned, as though something hidden had been exposed, and now everything that remained could be seen more clearly. Dominic stood near the window in Giselle's office, the same position he had taken days before. The city stretched out below, unchanged. Giselle entered without announcement, closed the door behind her. For a moment, she said nothing. Then, "It's over," she said. Dominic did not turn immediately. "No," he said. "It's contained." A small pause. "Not finished." She nodded, because she understood. Things like this rarely ended cleanly. They shifted. They adapted. They waited. She moved to her desk, opened the top left drawer, took out the drawing. The 3 figures, the house, the tree. She looked at it again, then placed it back. Not hidden, not displayed, just kept. "You knew," she said quietly, "about all of it." "I suspected," Dominic replied. "That's not the same thing." "No," he agreed, "but it's enough to act." She studied him for a moment. "You act before certainty." "I act when delay creates risk." Another pause. "You don't hesitate." He turned slightly, looked at her. "I do," he said. "Just not when it matters." That evening, Luna returned. She walked into the office with the same calm presence she carried everywhere. Pepper in one arm, her school bag in the other. She stopped in the center of the room, looked between them, then smiled. Not widely, not dramatically, just enough. "Did everything get fixed?" she asked. Giselle considered the question, then said, "Yes." Luna nodded, satisfied, as though the answer had always been that simple. They left the building together that night, not as employer and employee, not as CEO and security detail. Something else, undefined, but real. The city moved around them, lights shifting, voices blending, life continuing. Dominic walked on one side, Giselle on the other, Luna between them. Pepper held close. At one point, Luna reached out, took both their hands, without asking, without explanation, just because it felt right. Neither of them pulled away. Above them, the Nexara building stood as it always had. Glass, steel, control. But inside, something had changed. Not in the systems, not in the structure, in the people, in the connections, in the quiet, unspoken understanding that had formed between 3 individuals who had not expected to find each other in the middle of conflict. Dominic looked down briefly, at Luna, at the small hand holding his. Then, almost without realizing it, he smiled again. Still small, still quiet, but no longer accidental. And this time, it stayed.